With most stories about character lore that I cover on this channel, I've tried to find something interesting hidden within their backstory. Each character often has something unique in their story that the main stories sometimes do not have the time to cover. Some have unfortunate upbringings like Shenhe or Eula, others have hidden secrets like Kea, and a majority have experienced a tragedy or two like Heizo. But with Mika, there really isn't anything particularly outstanding, no secret society or mysterious beings. Instead, his story is a rather human one, a story of hard work and diligence in the pursuit of achieving one's dream. In a universe where superpowered beings and monsters abound, a human view can really put things into perspective. Before we explore more of Mikas Lore, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Mika comes from a family that is rather involved with the Knights of Favonius. His father is a retired knight while his brother Halfman is currently on active duty with them. His mother is also a noted author who often writes about the surrounding area of Mondstadt. Mika grew up in a family that was rather normal by teyvat standards, and when his parents went on an expedition, he learned to take care of both himself and his brother. His parents would often send them letters of their expedition, and with their mother being such a skilled writer, she would often describe the views and landscapes they experienced in great detail. Mika would develop his interest and love of cartography from reading these letters. Eventually, when his parents returned, he expressed his interest to them, and through the help and support of his family, he would eventually join the Knights of Favonius as a frontline surveyor in the reconnaissance team. The job of a surveyor was to functionally act as the recon team for the Knights, scoping out the terrain and potential dangers before the main force would reach them. They were also involved with keeping maps and charts up to date. Initially, Mika was only interested in the cartography portion, but being a part of the Knights made him realize that not all areas he needed to survey would be entirely safe. And so he would need to be proficient in mapmaking, surveying, as well as combat in order to reach and survive in these unknown places. It was during his Knight of the Favonius entrance test that Varka would take note of the young surveyor. Seeing his capabilities and hardworking nature along with a vision, which we will talk about a bit later, the Grandmaster would take an interest in Mika himself. Varka would allow him to join the frontline survey team in his expedition. However, he felt that Mika severely lacked sufficient combat ability and would thus train him personally. This is where his combat style largely developed. Varka advised him that as a surveyor, he would only need to fight to stay alive and escape when the opportunity presented itself. Thus, a fighting style that valued keeping the enemy at range would be more favorable to him. So Varka would train him in the use of a polearm and crossbow, a combination that allowed Mika to keep his enemies at bay until he could escape or get aid from a fellow knight. As of the current storyline, Mika has spent some time on the front lines with Varka, and during the recent Wine Laserfest has returned to Mondstadt to continue his role as part of Eula's reconnaissance team. Despite his rather normal and mundane role, at least compared to others, as part of the Favonius expeditions, there was a moment in which he was faced with something almost otherworldly. This encounter, and more importantly, seeing it from his perspective, kinda helps to ground how far the gap between the common person is to the bigger players in teyvat. We often see the world through the viewpoint of the traveler, who is implied to be a very powerful, million-year-old elemental Swiss Army knife. This might and does skew our view of the world teyvat really is. Often we see harbingers and ancient gods and don't really think much of it. For the traveler, it's just another Tuesday. But when Mika first encountered one of these bigger players, just from how the story was told, we can tell the fear that swept over him. During the expedition with Varka and his knights, as Mika was getting ready to go to bed, a knight came to him and informed him a warning was sent out. It seemed that the Knight of Favonius had encountered an enemy, the Fatui. As Mika made his way to the Grandmaster, the camp was in disarray, with people running all over the place. Looming in the distance in the dark of night was a faint impression of a battle line. Now the Knights have clashed with the Fatui before, and it wasn't something out of the ordinary. However, among the ranks of these enemies was something else. Something that gave out an aura of intense intimidation that made the Knights completely frantic. When Mika reached the Grandmaster and other knights, he could see among them a sense of worry and dread, with only the Grandmaster being completely calm. It was then that he realized why they were so agitated. In the distance, standing among the Fatui was a figure that looked different, but Mika couldn't make out who it was. A fellow knight then informed him that it was the Harbinger, the captain, and these Fatui weren't just foot soldiers, but rather his elite vanguard. As the battle lines of the knights and the Fatui faced down each other, Varka would calmly walk over to the other side, weapon in hand. They managed to come to an agreement, and with a signal from the Harbinger, the Fatui faded into the night. While nothing escalated during that face-off, most of the knights were terrified. Mika himself couldn't help but picture the battle that could have occurred. War was right on the tip of erupting, and the notion of that nearly overwhelmed him. He even admitted to himself that the Harbinger had a presence beyond anything he had ever experienced. In a direct fight, Mika instinctively knew that even a haphazard attack from such a person would be more than enough to defeat him, perhaps even kill him. This was the aura of strength he could feel emanating from the Harbinger. It also doesn't help that the captain was described by even Varka to be extremely powerful, beyond the measures of normal humans. While nothing bad happened, the experience gave Mika a glimpse of the bigger players in Teyvat, and more importantly, how far he was from the likes of Varka and the Harbinger. It also gives us as players a perspective we don't often see. As I mentioned, the Harbingers aren't that scary since we fought some of them, but seeing them from the eyes of Mika and the other knights reminds us that these are titans and far above normal mortals. It serves to remind us that those we fight on a daily basis are functionally monsters that no human could last even a few minutes against, let alone a full battle. Now you would think that encountering a Harbinger or the many challenges he faced during the expedition with the Grandmaster is how Mika got his vision. But in truth, he received the recognition of the gods before he even left Mondstadt. In fact, having a vision was one of the reasons why Varka took an interest in him in the first place. Like most of his story, the way he got his vision was pretty normal, bordering on a rather weird circumstance. During his time in the reconnaissance company, he took it upon himself to update certain areas of Mondstadt where the information was no longer up to date. Unfortunately, while mapping out some ruins, he came upon some abyss mages. At this time, he wasn't really well trained in combat and didn't really have his vision. As soon as the abyss mages took notice of him, they called on other monsters and began manipulating elements in preparation to attack him. I suppose they really just wanted to toy with him. Before their attacks could land a hit, a spear manifested out of nowhere, and following that, a cold burst of air smothered the flames the abyss mages had summoned. In the confusion, Mika managed to escape. He later informed the Knights of Favonius, who swiftly returned to end the abyss mages. What they found was the shields of the mages had been severely damaged, and upon seeing the glowing vision on Mika's hand, they understood why. To be honest with you, I have no clue why a vision was granted to him. It seemed to appear at a rather convenient time, saving his life, and based on the events we are told, it was also implied that Mika had no idea he utilized it to escape the abyss mages. Regardless, he still obtained one, and perhaps we will find out why in the future, but for now, it's really anyone's guess. Whatever the case may be, Mika is a pretty down-to-earth person. His apprehensions and insecurities are normal for someone who was placed into such a position. Nevertheless, he is still an accomplished and experienced surveyor and cartographer, and would only continue to be an asset to the Knights of Favonius. Despite what I've said throughout this video in regards to Mika being a rather normal human character, he is still an Elugene and has the potential to ascend to godhood. So don't misunderstand my point here, as I'm only referring to his rather new perspective on the world, and not claiming he is uninteresting in any way. While I was a little bit sad there wasn't anything mind-blowing in his lore, sometimes it's good to take a step back from the world-ending stuff and just see what the world is like from the perspective of normal people. And Mikas Lore exemplifies this really well. That brings us to the end of the video though, and if you enjoyed it, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.